That's like those old shows where like that really hard paper would come out of the machine with the hole punches in it. Um, Guys, welcome back to Pencil to Pencil Live, your favorite Wednesday 8 p.m. live stream, run, managed by expert cartoonists. You know and love them all. I am your first host. My name is JAMAR Nicholas. I am a cartoonist, but in this traditional book space, I'm known as an author illustrator. Leon the Extraordinary is the first book in my series at Scholastic under the Graphics imprint. You've heard of Graphics. You know about Dog Man and Raina's books and all those other ones, Mr. Wolf's Class, all of it. It's all there. Kazu's Amulet, you know. The next book in my series, Leon, Worst Friends Forever, is in stores May 7th, 2024. Pre-order now. I would be remiss if I did not wish the world heavyweight champion of webcomics another happy birthday. You may know him in these streets as, do the belt motion, Stone Cold Steve Conley. What's up, Steve Conley?
Hello, guys. Good to see you.
Well,
Very
hello.
good to see you. Worst friends forever. That's fantastic. I'm so excited. You said May 7th, 2024?
Yes, sir.
I got to figure out some sort of mnemonic. We had the 410.
I know.
10-4.
Well, somebody on Coffee Break says, well, May 7th, that's Jamar Mageddon.
That's fantastic.
Steve, what do you do, sir?
My name is Steve Conley. I write and draw the webcomic The Middle Age. You can read it on middleagecomic.com. It's on Webtoons and Tapas and Go Comics. I write it and draw it all on an iPad and present it to you. Look on all your devices, whatever you got, even paper. If you like, you don't like the devices, you don't like the glows and the cathode ray tubes and your flat screens, you can read them in book form. And I also make TTRPG stuff like Intoximancy and Death Dealing and the upcoming Meta Domain Cleric, which you can check out at prayershandbook.com. And I would be remiss if I didn't introduce the Tower Power, the man of the hour, too sweet to be sour, the maestro of mark making, Mr. Mike Manley.
Hey, everybody. Actually, I was expecting, Steve, I was expecting you to be outside like Jim Catori, that guy from the Weather Channel, you know, like standing on the surf. You know, I was expecting to get a hurricane live coverage.
I was lashed to the hood of my Kia Optima like what was it? Forrest Gump, Lieutenant Dan.
Oh, man. Mike, before we do a weather report, what do you do, pray tell?
I draw two syndicated comic strips currently, Judge Parker and the original Man in the Cave, The Phantom.
Wow. That's fantastic. And, you know, I hear that, like my one buddy who's in the Navy, he says, chow is continuous. You're always hungry. As drawing comic strips daily, well, two of them at the same time, is that continuous? Is there ever a break, Mike Manley?
I haven't had a break since I was 23 years old, luckily. Knock on IKEA.
Not going to press laminate.
Yeah, I really have not been completely unemployed. Not even a month, I think, luckily, since I started when I was 23. So next July will be 40 years.
Wow, Mike Manley.
Holy heck. That's crazy.
I know, it's weird. It's bizarre because in some ways it seems like a really long time ago.
Yeah.
And then other times it seems like it's not really that long ago. Only occasionally do I find something that I did that I don't remember. Don't remember doing.
Yeah.
Mostly probably like sketches. I don't think I've forgotten a job, but yeah, so 40 years, which is sort of the subject of our show tonight, right?
Yeah, look at that.
You know, I am now the subject of the show tonight.
That's right. Gotta put this lamp over your head.
You know, it's an interesting career.
Yeah, so I would love to kind of talk about that and talk about a couple of these different primers. So you guys, welcome back to the live cast. We're having such a enjoyable time just shooting a breeze with you for the past couple of weeks. This is, I guess this might be the part 7 episode, but we're gonna belay those naming tactics for a minute.
7.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. All right. So I had a Gen X flashback. Sorry. Where we were kind of putting our heads together, and we had this really great idea because, you know, even Mike celebrating 40 years in the business, wanted to maybe kick this ball around for a bit. Say you followed your dreams. Say you were that little kid who couldn't stop drawing in the margins of his textbook. You've gotten through all the trials and tribulations. You've done your officer and a gentleman, walk out of the plant with Deborah Winger in your arms. You did everything. You made it. You're a cartoonist. Congratulations. That's fantastic.
What's a Deborah Winger?
I'm showing my age. Mayonnaise. So what happens after that? How do you sustain a career as a cartoonist? Now, you know, a lot of the questions we get asked is about, like, what pen do you use? Is this the right paper? But, you know, it's really interesting to kind of like let's fast forward a little bit. You've gotten through all of that. You're getting gigs. You've got a business card. You might have had an answering machine that asks people to leave a message when you're out of town, Jim Rockford. But are you thinking about 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, 30 years down the road? Is it sustainable? How did we even get this far? So I thought this would be a great conversation to have live by some expert cartoonists, and I hope everybody that's following us in the chat and watching live may have some good questions for us. So maybe, I'll just get the ball rolling here. Now, Steve, it is almost a crime. It's almost criminal, Steve Conley, how undervalued you are in the webcomics community, because you were like there at the beginning. I'm sorry. Back before there were motion comics, you were doing motion comics. Before people were really like doing like daily webcomics, you were doing daily webcomics in color with stuff moving in it. Right? And this was what, 98, 99, you were doing stuff like that?
Yeah, I even cooked up a way to syndicate them before there was an embed tag. But that's not, I don't feel underappreciated. I don't know what, I mean, what do you
I think you're underappreciated.
No, I mean, I feel like I don't know, my work has never been more appreciated. I feel good about it. If you're talking about his as a historical footnote,
sure.
Yeah, what's neither here nor there. That's the 20th century. That's the before time. That's
I know about the before time.
And the thing is that you are not in charge of your appreciation. That is something that is bestowed upon you by the industry or readers, right? You don't have control over that. And if you think you do, you'll probably end up being disappointed.
Yeah, I think you calibrate all that stuff. I think you just, I'm very happy with the hand I was dealt and what I've been able to do with it. So if that definitely helped me keep my career going for a while. I mean, it was very easy back then. I was doing web design, interactive design, and that pays compared to comics. It's always paid better. But I was able to get sponsors for my web comics back then. It was, this is before, I don't want to get into the history lesson of all that stuff, but getting sponsorship for it, it sustained itself for 500 episodes. That felt like a good run, but it wasn't like the Penny Arcade guys. It wasn't like Scott Kurtz. Those guys, there's a Daniel Corsetto. There's a whole bunch of cartoonists who have just had amazing runs producing brilliant volumes of work. I'm happy that I have an archive of stuff that I've done back then. But that's the best part about it is, doing the work and then having it done. And then if as long as you're happy with that part, I don't anything else is kind of like, you know,
would you say gravy? Is that what you're going to say?
May or I feel like valuing any of that stuff. Steve was pre the actually my first webcomic won an award up against it was Astounding Space Thrills. It was 1999. It was one of the first webcomic awards, and it was my comic was up against the Matrix webcomic. There was
I remember that.
It was a big deal. I was surprised I won. I thought Matrix had it in the bag. I think it was the first and last thing I ever won. But no, I don't really care about the the accolades are nice if you can use them to move more books, but I've always been a guy who's like, I just like to sell more books and keep running in the treadmill and not get kicked off.
So, well, let's kind of slow this down a little bit. So, kind of how I preempted the beginning of our talk here is kind of like, a lot of the things we talk about or answer with a lot of people who have interest is how do you get in, right? Now, how do you get in now that you're in? How do you stay in? Or as we put into the title of this, the long game.
Right.
So we all know the pitfalls of being a creative, right? This is not even talk about comics. Just doing anything creative for a living is hard, and you're probably not getting paid what you're worth. So a lot of things that somebody might do in maybe a muggle job, where you're thinking about like, I don't want to get into taxes and all that kind of stuff. That's not really what this is about. It's just kind of like planning out huge chunks of your future. Like say you got a job and you got a good government job, Mike Manley. I got a government job. And people, the first thing they tell you is stuff like, oh, well, you know what? Put whatever you can into your 401k or think about retirement. Don't forget about your pension. And when you're a cartoonist, you're just happy that the check showed up and you can cash it. You know what I mean? So we're kind of start off on uneven footing. But something that I really was interested in talking about tonight was kind of like the survival part of it. I talk a lot about resistance and what resistance looks like as a creative. And resistance could be anybody in your sphere or even yourself, which is a huge part of this, is, what do they call it? I forgot what I was going to say, where you have to even fool yourself into thinking you can do this. Right. And once you've gotten all the
imposter syndrome,
imposter syndrome. And once you kind of fight all those giants and kill all those ogres, is what happens next? What's the next thing? We all have friends in the animation business or video games and things like that, where they're entirely set up to working gig to gig to gig to gig to gig. Even to the detriment of enjoying what they're doing, they're thinking about when this ends. We've talked about this on the podcast. We'll talk to like an animator and just like, how far ahead are you worrying about the next thing? And you're like, oh man, sometimes like 2 jobs ahead. So maybe we can just start at this point. Mike, when you started in the business and you finally got in and you were getting mainstream work, what were you thinking about next? Were you like, oh, I need to sustain this as long as possible? You hope you get another mainstream gig? Like, what was your thought process in young Mike Manley's studio back then?
Well, I guess I should preface this by saying that the way I got in and the world I got in, as I mentioned before, doesn't actually exist anymore. In the fact that most people of my generation and the previous generation got a job, usually a little backup. They test you. If you did good, then you get another, then you get another, and then usually someone screws a pooch somewhere. There's some sore butt dog somewhere, some terrible deadline, and they go, hey, kid, I like the cut of your jib. Get me pictures of Spider-Man and turn this pages in 2 weeks. That's usually how most people of my generation who were working at the major companies got a job. And so You wanted to work to the point. You wanted to perform to the point that, at least in my case, Marvel and DC would be willing to give me regular work, right? And that kind of happened sort of twice in a way. One was my first time going over from DC to Marvel, getting that Transformer issue, and then later on was working on that issue of Daredevil.
Mm-hmm.
It was by Ditko, right? And then tightening it up, the breakdowns, and working on it with Al Williamson. And then Carl Potts gave me regular inking gig after that. So I had been working on Conan the King previously, but then that ended. And then I jumped around and did a bunch of different things in the beginning of my career, like kids' books, activity books. It helped being stylistically flexible, which I would say is one of the first big assets is being well-rounded or flexible. Number two, I'm always a paranoid, and I'm always expecting that the wolf is always on the front porch, right? So I never rested on my laurels. I took every opportunity. And again, that whole area was very different because someone would give you a lead, you'd have to call somebody, maybe you mailed them samples, right?
Oh, how about, did you use your facsimile machine?
This is way before any facsimile machine.
I just like saying that.
Right? In fact, when I bought my first fax machine around 89 or 90. So the whole thing was very different because either you would go up and show work in person, or you had to mail your samples, and talk to somebody, or you got somebody to recommend you, hey, give this guy I think he's good, give this guy a job. So it's very, very different. But again, probably a little bit different than turns out some people, because I was always aware of the as Jack Kirby has that famous saying, comics will break your heart, kid. I was very aware from the beginning of my career of the downside of comics, and just about everybody that I loved, right? Many of those people had bad stories. So being like forewarned and forearmed, and being nice, trying to do the best job, trying to be on time, all that. So I was very aware of the fact that if you were good but late, well, that's like one mark on you, right? If you're good but late and kind of difficult, that might be the kiss of death, right? That might be. And comics was slowly on an upward trajectory starting in the 80s and the early, and then kicked off in the early 90s. So I was very aware of longevity. I was very aware of saving money. I was very aware of rainy day. But again, as I realized, maybe I was a little bit different because I was very aware of and interested in that aspect of it. So I never felt like I went in blind, sort of, you know what I mean? Like, oh, I just want to get this job. And, like some guys were more kind of laid,
head down, kind of,
or kind of just like laid back. I got enough money. I got enough money, paid my rent for a couple months. They're not particularly driven, but if you wanted a regular book at Marvel and DC, there's only one way you're going to get it, or two ways. Got to be good enough. You got to be dependable.
Mm-hmm.
right? And if you're good enough but not dependable, you'll get work, but you won't get a monthly bill. And if you're, you really have to be that. I mean, it's very different. It's very different now. I would say that the level of professionalism as compared to the level of expectation and professionalism when I started, it's very different.
And from your point of view, I can understand how frustrating it must be to your generation. And I make it sound like you're like 90 years old or something like that, but your generation of cartoonists were, obviously we're all kind of slaves to the clock, but it was different then, right? And even you just like slipping or falling down the stairs a little bit means you never get hired again.
Well, you might burn a bridge,
Yeah.
right? And then then you might have to go off and do something somewhere else, and then come back, and then maybe you get a second. I mean, there's artists who were always burning bridges.
Right.
I mean, there's even famous people like Alex Toth who burned bridges not because he was late, but because he was difficult to work with.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So he would take a story and he would change it. Right. And as I remember the story, there was some story that he did, and Joe Kubert was the editor, and Joe Kubert, they were friends. And he basically said, here's the story, Alec, don't change anything. And he did, and I don't remember if they didn't use the story or, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so you can be good but difficult. Then people don't, people love your work, but then they don't want to, they don't want to work with you because you're unpredictable. And if you really think about it, the business was so much smaller then.
Mm-hmm.
Were there even 40 artists working in comics, 50 artists working in comics back then? Now there's like, it seems like there's like there's like a machine that's just making cartoonists. Like every time you go on Instagram, you see, well, where this person came? I never saw this person's work before.
Like master mold, right? Spitting out sentinels. Yeah.
Yeah. And, I think you have to, you're always responsible for your career. I said this the other day on my Facebook page. No one else is responsible for your career but you. Marvel doesn't owe you a job. DC doesn't owe you a job. Disney doesn't owe you a job. There's, if you're laboring under this false pretense that the corporation's going to owe you something, that's not how it works. You have personal relationships with people that work for those corporations who might be loyal to you, might like you, might go to bat for you. But in the end, when those people are no longer at the company, or, they go, oh, we got the message today, flush the system. So I think you have to be aware. That's one of the things I tell young cartoonists. You have to be aware of that, and you also have to husband your skill, take care of your skill, and your story always have to be adding skills, because again, I posted this on my Facebook the other day. Al Williamson started in 47 or 48, worked exactly the same way until he retired, 2010, 11. No one will ever get to work exactly the same way for 50 years. It's just going to be impossible. You're not going to even use the same stylus, the same programs, the same version of the programs. Even if you're drawing on paper, You know, the way the programs, the way you get your work from one part to the other part is always changing. So,
Yeah.
you know, as being a career cartoonist requires you to not only be a husband and good to yourself about your art and your skills, but also to understand the environment at large in which you are operating in.
Mm-hmm.
As we can see in Hollywood, right? So Hollywood's shut down right now, which means that all these artists aren't working because the writers aren't working and the actors aren't working, right? So there's all these other craftspeople. There's all these other people that are not going to be doing storyboards or painting backgrounds or, you know, so you have to be aware of the big picture too.
Mm-hmm. I think that's that can be understated, and we say this a lot about even talking to younger cartoonists who may have a strong fascination with the art form. Maybe they love SpongeBob or whatever, but they don't know anything about how the stuff is made or who makes it, or who directed what episode or any of that. I think that just could be a generational shift, not necessarily that they don't care. Maybe they don't know. Maybe that's not important to them the way it was to us. But as a career cartoonist, I know we've said this a million times, we could spend 3 hours just talking about the history of comics. I could talk about Yellow Kid for
Yeah.
5 hours, but I think it's really important to understand, almost like a general, you see the entire map, right? You see the entire battlefield from your stance and know, you know, how all the pieces move. And I just feel like, you know, some people do themselves a disservice by not understanding the battlefield that they're trying to get in on. Steve, were you going to say something?
I love that point you made about knowing the history and having a familiarity with the who creates the things that you love and the
Yeah,
stuff that you want to create, and
yeah,
where all this came from. That
yeah.
is really seemed to be a deciding factor with a lot of the folks who I mean, we all grew up working alongside cartoonists or people who we thought were going to be cartoonists. Some of them were more talented than me at the time, that's
Mm,
for damn sure. And they kind of fell by the wayside. And a commonality was a lack of interest in those histories. A lack, you know, I really feel like part of this, what keeps you going in some way, is that history. Is like the more all of us seem to eat that stuff up.
yeah.
And even the people who watch Pencil to Pencil and other, I mean, I'm sure other shows exist. Possibly, who knows? I'll ask the algorithm later. Um, but there's a that hunger for this material is kind of what keeps a lot of people going. It's fuel, and
Mhm.
when they don't have that interest, when they don't know those things, that seems like a real, I don't know, maybe a sign that this isn't the world that they want to be in.
Right.
Well,
Uh, Go ahead, Mike.
it's interesting because that comes up all the time as a teacher, right? So I would teach, like I said, I taught that illustration class for 10 years at high school. And so you would get all these 14 to 18-year-olds coming in who want to do, if you want to be an artist. It's amazing how many of them have the interest, but no idea who begat what, where, what, when, why. And I always tell them, it's like you're missing so much awesome stuff that you might love or inform you. And so that was sort of like one of my chief jobs was to say, oh, you like this? Well, have you ever seen this? And you are actually connected to that history. It's not like a dead thing,
Right.
off in some old books. You are actually using the same language
Mhm.
that people invented at the turn of the last century. It's like 100 years ago. You're still, if you're drawing a thought balloon, you're, drawing things in a sequence of panel, you're still speaking the same language. So you're directly connected to the artists of the past. So, if you study music composition, what do? You study all the great classical composers, so that you want to go and you want to compose. Oh, well, now you know how to compose and where the stuff comes from, the history of things. In fact, I've been listening to a very interesting podcast called The Soundtrack Show on Spotify. The guy does a great job because he talks about that. He connects modern composers to the classic Hollywood composers to classical music, and how each thing, the classical guys of the 30s and the 40s borrowed from Beethoven and, all these great, Wagner was a big influence on people. And so when you learn that, and then you're listening to Star Wars, let's say,
Sure,
you understand, oh yeah, John Williams is borrowing stuff from Korngold, and Korngold was borrowing stuff from Wagner, right? And we do the same thing. If you draw any little dots around the energy of your guy firing a beam, you're getting it from Jack Kirby. Even if you don't like Jack Kirby, you somehow picked up that language, right?
Yeah, no, I love that. There's a question, and guys, everybody who's watching live, the chat room's starting to fill up. Ask us a question, and I'm so indebted to you that you guys are so quiet because you're listening, and I think that's really cool. But throw some questions too. Pencil Lear in good standing, Eternity Forever says, how do you decide whether or not you want to self-publish your own or work for the bigger companies? What's the pitfalls for both Steve and Mike? Oh, JN doesn't get any love with this one? It's okay. What do you guys think? Steve?
Maybe the first question was for you. And then the second part was for
Don't try to sweeten it. Just answer the question.
I never had much interest in working for the big companies. I didn't go into it thinking that would be a thing. I always wanted to tell my own stories. Yeah. And I didn't think that the big publishers would let me do that. Sometimes I've gotten the opportunity, presumably because everyone else's phone was out of service or something like that. And I was the first one to pick up, and then I got to work on some fun projects. But it was never like something I pursued. I always wanted to work for myself. The pitfalls are many, but the pitfalls for self-publishing is we talked about this before, is that the thought was you'd be in the classic sense of this publishing world, you'd be discovered, and suddenly you'd have this mechanism that would work for you, that would be promoting your work and publishing your work. You would just be in this creative studio environment. You'd produce this beautiful thing, you'd ship it off to the publisher, and they would do all the magic. They'd get it into the stores, they would promote you, they would run billboards and publish it and all that stuff. And when you're self-publishing, all that falls on your shoulders. Now in the modern publishing world, that stuff now falls on you anyway. In many respects, you don't have to worry about the picking a printer and worrying about paper stock as much, but you still are, even in author illustrators find themselves responsible for their own social media profile and making sure that they're attending certain events and things like that. But those pitfalls are that you have to wear a million hats, that you have to be responsible for all that stuff.
Those plates.
Yeah, and for me, it's always been a thing of keeping my costs low so I can afford to keep being creative. It's real tempting that the idea of a day job and a 1040 easy tax form is real sweet, but it's not why I'm on this planet. It's to create silly, dumb things that make me happy and hopefully find a way to convince the world that they should part with some of their hard-earned money.
I love it. And you know what? It's funny that you bring that up, because that's another thing that people just assume, that once you're working for this certain entity, that all of a sudden you don't have to do anything anymore. Or you get to kind of like clasp your hands behind your back while somebody drives the bus for you.
You said you had that experience, right? At one of the early events, they brought you into some convention and you're like, okay, how can I help? Can I move boxes? Can I
Yeah, I had to settle myself down in that regard. Like that was a whole other thing where I had to kind of understand the tempo of how this stuff worked because now in this space I'm a talent and I can't really be seen like opening boxes with a box cutter and setting up a table. Like just go somewhere else and we'll take care of that. But that's maybe one of the only instances where I think that applies. But it's still like all the so much of it is always on your shoulders, and I think people who aren't waiting for someone to make those calls for them probably are better off than somebody who, as I've been around those types too, folded arm people who are mad that their publisher's not doing more for
Right.
them. Oh well, my book tanked because they didn't. And I think maybe we have a leg up on that stuff because we self-published and we know what has to go into this stuff for anybody to see it. So it's not, you never have the luxury of just waiting for somebody to make everything sexy for you. You got to do it yourself.
It's all your fault.
Yeah. Well, I think it's personality. Really,
Mhm.
I think the older I get, the more I realize when I look back over the course of my career, personality is probably the most important thing, right? Like if you are easy to get along with, that's a personality. Are you a type A personality, right? Some people don't like to cooperate. Some people don't like to make changes. Some people don't work well with other people, right? And so I think your personality is what sort of decides whether you want to be someone who works for Marvel and DC or you want to be a self-publisher. And then if you're going to do that, you take on, like Steve says, you take on all these other responsibilities, but you like it. It's worth that for you to be able to do your own stuff without having to compromise, right? Some personalities don't like to compromise. Other personalities would say, hey, look, give me a paper, give me a piece of a pencil, a piece of paper, let me sit over in the corner, just let me draw. Let somebody else worry about all the other stuff. There's like a lot of people that work in animation, right? And they like to do one of the many jobs you can do in animation. Comics are sort of like that too, because you can be a letterer, you can be an inker.
Yeah.
The inker is very important, but I think inker really came into being in the 60s and 50s where you had guys who were really good at storytelling, which was the most important part was the drawing of the comic. And so if you could get somebody to draw more and you could get somebody to finish it good with the inks, right? So there's a lot of people who just became inkers, but now that whole occupation is almost effectively disappeared. And it's not, inking is not in any way the way it was back when I was inking, right? Because of technology now. And even like inking digitally, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you just wanted to ink, I know a fair amount of inkers trying to find work and major talents, people that would be on major books back in the day, but you're doing one part of the job, right? So, like I said, I think it starts with the personality. If you want to be a self-publisher, or because you might not have any interest in drawing Batman or Richie Rich or Bugs Bunny, or you just like drawing your own weird little character, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's all you're interested in doing, And again, teaching young people, you kind of see like, well, does this person have the personality to be an illustrator, or are they really a fine artist? And that's not saying one is better than the other, but some people have a personality that's really heavily more in one direction than the other. Like if you don't like to make corrections or take criticism, well, you're not going to be able to work in animation, and you're not going to be able to work in comics. You're going to have to do stuff by yourself, because if somebody goes, well, look, now that's got to be purple, and you're like, the hell with that. No one tells me to make my shit purple, you know.
Blueberry does.
Right, you know, and there are some people that are like that. That's actually one of the frustrations of being a commercial artist, because you're giving it. It's not yours. Batman is not yours.
Mm-hmm.
Spider-Man is not yours, right? SpongeBob is not yours, right? And when you turn in something and you're very passionate and you do it, and they go like, I don't know.
Is that something you were good at from the beginning, Mike, or is it something that you had to? Was that like a thicker skin that you had to develop over time?
I think, I mean, while I was also doing comics, I was doing a lot of activity books in the beginning of my career. So, like, I did Barbie stuff, or Muppet Babies, all kinds of stuff like that. And so, when you're working for Disney or Barbie, they would go like, no, you got to make her a little thinner. You got to do this here. You got to put this on model. And that was part of the job, right? If you had to make the changes that they requested. If you don't want to make the changes that they request, then you just send all the art back, and later, right? You're done, right?
Said you seaworthy.
Right. So sometimes it irks you when the client wants a change that you really don't agree with.
Right.
I would say in comics, not as much as working on licensed character work, right? Like when you're drawing Bugs Bunny, he's got to look a certain way. If you're drawing SpongeBob, he's got to look a certain way, right? I mean, even in the 70s when Kirby went to DC, they changed all of his heads on Superman because Kurt Swan's head was the style. And Jack Kirby does not draw anything like Kurt Swan. So I don't think it would have mattered to most kids as long as he had
the spit curl, right?
Right. But corporations go, this is our character. We've spent millions of dollars. We've got a brand here. When people look at that, we want them to feel that way. And Disney is probably the king of that. At that time, my girlfriend was doing, I think she did a Winnie the Pooh book. And when she did her drawings, when they sent them to, I think, Western Publishing, who had the license. That went to Disney. Somebody in Disney said, no, that divot in Pooh's head's like this, not like that. Would actually send a tracing paper draw over. Then you had to go and fix your stuff, So, sort of from the beginning, if you're working on licensed characters, after your first job, that you're going to be required sometimes to make changes. When I worked at Marvel in DC, I had to I argued with the assistant editor, Jordan Gorfinkel, a couple times about the way that I drew Robin. Because he seemed to have this thing about the way I drew Robin's thighs. And I'm like, no, I think his thighs look fine. So, I have a cover that I inked on Alpha Flight that has a John Romita paste over of the face,
which
I love because it's a John Romita face. So Romita can replace all my faces. I don't care.
Right.
Art by John Romita, but I know that was a huge thing for some artists when the editor would say, no, make it look more like, in the 70s, you saw that a lot.
And Mike, I'm sure nobody checked in with you when you saw the issue. You were like, well, wait a minute. Oh, somebody changed that, right? The editor's not checking in with you.
Right. Now, usually if you went in, they might request something and you could sit in the bullpen and actually fix it. Right. On Judge Parker, there were a couple incidents where I believe it was the Washington Post, didn't like the way I drew the girls' boobs.
Yeah.
They were too sexy. So I had to, well, they sort of they couldn't force me, but they're like, do you mind making this change?
It's a strong suggestion.
Right. So I did the paste, the paste over. But again, I don't own Judge Parker. Right. And if they say, no, go through and put a Hitler mustache on everybody, I could say no, then they'll just get somebody else to do it. Right. And then they won't want to work with me anymore. So again, it's part of being a professional is you sort of pick and choose your battles. If you own the strip, you own Snoopy, you can say, stuff it. I'm not going to do it, probably. But if you're like me working on what they call a legacy strip, where it's not my strip, like Batman's not my character, they request a change, you basically have to make the change. That bothered me more when I was younger, but I think specifically working in animation, where you might draw a whole 300-page storyboard, rough it out, send it in, director looks at it and goes, yeah, I like this. I'm not so sure about, you have to make changes. It's a collaborative process. So again, if that rubs you the wrong way because you're a fucking genius,
I'm an artiste.
Right, yeah. Well, you got your dolly thing twirling, your mustache twirling.
I love that everybody knew what I was talking about.
Well, if that bothers you, then you have to do your own thing because it's completely unprofessional. Even though you may be right and their decision is asinine or in poor taste, but it's their thing and they're paying for it, so they get to say, put a pineapple on a pizza.
This was funny as I was, I had a conversation earlier today about professionalism and kind of what that means now. And I think the real kind of like baseline of all this is that your professional, let's even talk about like high school, your reputation, right? Every one of us has a reputation that's over our heads that we can't see. You know what I mean? And sometimes you're able to be in the same space where you hear what people think of you. It doesn't happen very often. Right. And, telling a young cartoonist about the things that you do follow you, like say you might be really into what you're doing, but you're kind of late, like probably a little too much. And at some point, people don't ask you back for things. And if you're not putting two and two together, like, oh, well, they told me that I'm done, so I guess I've got the weekend off now. Let's go see Ninja Turtles. Like, I think you're missing a point.
Right.
The point there is that you kind of like got soft fired. You know what I mean?
Right.
You know what I mean? Because there's also some times where, the landscape Mike came from, people will confront you to your face and say, pack up your shit. You're not working here anymore. You got to go, or they'll walk you out the front door.
And a big thing for younger people that I never had to deal with is I did not have social media. So I couldn't go on social media and make an ass out of myself, right? And then have that come back to bite me in the ass.
Yeah.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So again, if you look at your career
Mm-hmm.
and you sort of imagine where your career wants to go,
Mm-hmm.
how do you steer your boat in that direction, right? There's many whirlpools and there's all kinds of things out there to swamp your boat. But I see a lot of people, I think, almost torpedo themselves because of social media. You can say something stupid. I mean, I just saw something that James Gunn said about Tim Burton's Batman, like way back, and now people are digging it up because now he's the head of Warner Brothers. And so my advice is to not ever post
Period.
or put things on social media that will be a torpedo. I know an artist who got fired from a major strip because he put something up on Twitter that he probably shouldn't have done, and when you're young, you don't think about, well, 10 years from now, somebody could dig something up that you said, or some post that you did, or some cartoon that you drew that was inappropriate, or whatever. So again, you're trying to like sail your ship. Don't put these other things out there. They're going to be landmines that come back and like suddenly get you, And I think social media makes it so easy for you to get riled up and keyboard warrior go and say something.
Like you're putting your own death charges in front of your own boat.
I see that. I see that, and I don't know. For me, my goal was to be like Gil Kane or John Buscema or Joe Kubert, somebody who did monthly count. That's what I want. That was my goal, right? Then you have to figure out, okay, well, how do you do that, right? And what you don't realize often when you're young, when you're trying to figure out your path, is that point is no longer fixed. A long time in comics, that point was a fixed point. Fixed publishers, fixed way of working. 50 years, like I said, with guys like Al, right? The ground is changing daily, right? You might say, I want to work for DC. Who's to say DC will even be here 6 months from now with the way things are going with Discovery, right? Who's to say Marvel will be here a year from now? Who's to say that they will be able to pay rates a year from now that even if you got your opportunity to draw Spider-Man, you could actually afford to do it, right? There's a lot of things like that. So you have to really, again, you have to not only have to work on your skill and not put any extra landmines in the water, but then you have to look on the horizon. You have to look at the environment, and the environment is radically changing because of all these corporations. And so things that when you're sitting down and you're drawing and you're creating and you're in that world, you might not be thinking that, the stock price went down 40% today. And what that bowling ball crashing through the solid glass headquarters is going to end up stopping your career. you know.
So, Mike, to that, just to kind of pin all these things to the corkboard. So, kind of what you're saying is, on top of you kind of moving forward, trying to do your best work, you have to pay attention to the landscape. Kind of what we talked about earlier, looking at the map, even while you're in the middle of a job, right?
And always looking at the map, always paying attention to the map, because, like I said, the environment for entertainment, and I think if you're working in comics, you're working in entertainment. That landscape is changing daily, right? Some new app is coming up, some corporation buys some other corporation. All that stuff is changing. So if you want the people who have the longest careers were either the most creative people with ideas, like Kirby being able to generate like endless concepts, or you were a great player. You know, you were prolific, you were flexible, you could work in different ways. And all that now, I think, is imperative, because I think the only thing I would say, which is what you guys, both you guys are doing, is having your own IP is probably the most secure of all of these permutations of working in comics or working in entertainment, because if you create it and you control it, then at least you're making decisions whether to sell it or how to do it. You're not being told like, oh, well, turn it in on Monday. Oh, and by the way, there's no more scripts coming. You know, Tuesday the doors are locked. Wednesday the stock price crashes. All these things that I see that are affecting my career and my current career, right, which is working on comic strips. Newspapers is not a growth industry. You do not suddenly read, oh yeah, there's 4 more newspapers in Philadelphia. You know,
Right.
that is not a growth industry, right? So I have to look 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, 5 years. Where do I want to be?
There's an added element there, I would say, Mike. Not only is it creating having your own creations, but also, and it ties into what you're talking about it's kind of your own reputation. I mean, I look at what Jamar's done online, is excellent presence online and excellent creator. I think you need that combination, because I think it's that whatever Jamar does, people will be interested in, because he's the brand. I kind of feel like the people who follow me and are on my mailing list, things like that, those folks are going to follow me in whatever I do, even if they might not be interested in role-playing games, but they'll be like, well, let's see what he's doing, because he writes funny stuff. Maybe it's a funny rule book, you know? And I know people don't play the games or buy the books anyway. It's that sort of thing where you have to be responsible for your own presentation. And, forget Twitter, forget the corporation, this is the stuff they can't take away from you, right? You can lose it on your own, but you can't get pink slipped if you are working for yourself.
I love this conversation, and I'm glad that the chat is filling up. I wanted to talk about pivoting, and there's a couple of questions I want to get to in the chat, but thinking about, let's rewind it. Let's get back in the hot tub time machine. And when you're just like, yo, I'll do anything for a check, or you get those old phone calls. It's like, hey, we're having a fair this weekend. Can you do caricatures? Sure. When do you need me there? And I remember I had one of those. I think I was passable as a caricaturist, but what this funny story was, it was a Catholic school. I think it was an all-girl Catholic school square dance hoedown theme. and like all these girls looked exactly the same with pigtails and cowboy hats and bandanas. I just drew the same girl like all night. And I got out of there. I was on a train going back into the city. Who was that? With this check in my pocket, and I went, I don't ever want to do that again. That was the longest night of my life.
But that's good though. That's a good thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm certain you guys have had this experience. You've done a good job for somebody. 10 years later, they come back to you for something because they had a positive experience. They've dealt with so many artists between you last time they worked with you, and they're like, oh, they were disappointed by this artist or disappointed by that artist, and they come to you because you delivered. And I mean, I don't know. They can go. It's like cicadas. I don't hear from them for 14 years, and then they just surface again. And I'm like, oh, this is an amazing payday from a client I haven't talked to in an age, and a wonderful gig. But if you deliver, that's amazing.
Yeah.
But that's a different. What you're talking about, like at the beginning of your career, right? You want any opportunity. You have to take. Part of it is taking those opportunities and learning from those opportunities. So if it is like, yo, I cannot do caricatures for this kind of a thing because A, I'm not good at it. B, I don't like it. It was a terrible experience. Or I love it. This is an awesome thing, right? I mean, when you're young, you take any opportunity. That's part of your growth, right? And then eventually you know, now I'm at the point where I don't, if somebody called me for caricatures, I have other people. I get people asking me all the time for stuff that it's not something that I particularly want to do or I need to do.
And you can like
recommend other people
right
do them. But there was a time, like I said in the beginning, I didn't care about Muppet Babies. I didn't care about a lot of that stuff that I drew in the first 5-6 years of my career. I didn't love it, but I wanted the opportunity, and that opportunity was a step to the next opportunity, right? So if that's something that you have to do to get to the next step, then that's what you do. And you try to do the best job. You try to be nice because you, like Steve says, you may do something for somebody today, and they may come back to you, or they may recommend you to somebody else. Hey, this guy 10 years ago saved my ass on this job. Give him a call. You know?
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
right. That's right. Eternity says, get those likes up. Let's get those thumbs up. And if you're watching this live, like and subscribe. You know what to do. Thanks, Eternity. I want to get to this question. We've already talked an hour, and this one's for me, you guys. I made it. People like me. Do you believe that?
Cut our mics.
I know. Eternity says, for Jamar, yes, I'm listening. What do you expect in a long-term publication of your creator-owned series? Will you find the need to pull a Waterston or a Davis? Wow. When is it love or is it money, like the Prince song? So I think if I could break down what you're asking is kind of like, do I suppose I get to a certain point where I don't even have to do the thing anymore, or there's a machine around me that pushes this stuff out and I just sign my name. I'm Matt Groening it at the bottom.
That's awesome. I want that.
I want that too.
My name can be a sticker now. Just putting little stickers.
I just want, Matt Groening that.
Yeah.
You know what? That's not necessarily where my head is at, but maybe to kind of sidestep this a little bit. A lot of times, young people will ask me, and we talk about this all the time on the show. When's the cartoon? This should be a movie, and that's its own headache. But again, I'm a cartoonist, and my thought process at all times is to make more stuff. not to make a cartoon. You know what I mean? Make more.
What?
What?
That's when it's real.
You heard it here first. That's where our culture is right now. That the ultimate form of entertainment is a cartoon or a movie. You know,
Now
look at,
it's been officially sanctioned by the Pope, right?
look at, even like, talk about Jeff Smith a little bit when, it got out that his Netflix thing tanked, and he was frustrated and everybody was so mad go read Bone again. That's all you need to do. Don't worry about a cartoon. Go read that phone book again and buy one and give it to your kids. That's all you need to do.
Well, that's why Watterson never did anything else besides
Mhm.
the comic strip, because he wanted it to be pure as a comic strip.
Yeah.
And that guy turned down probably hundreds of millions of dollars by
Yeah.
doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm sure there are people that would go, wait, what? I would love a Calvin and Hobbes plush. But, the ethics of how he did his business warranted that wasn't for him. And I
Again,
completely
that's
can get behind that.
personality. That
Yeah.
ties into that kind of personality, because I think Schultz had the kind of personality that said, okay, all right, starting in the 60s, making cartoons and everything. I mean, that Schultz supposedly made like $40 million a year in licensing fees for like forever. I mean, the guy was just incredibly wealthy, but he still was able to sit down and draw his strip, because the other thing is when you start doing all that, that's taking away from if you were doing the Leon cartoon and you wanted to be very involved in it, it would be very hard for you to be able to do a graphic novel while you were doing that. In fact, it would be impossible.
Mm-hmm. Right. And, those deals are structured so differently from each other. And, I've also run into people who have things like that going on who said, and, these are parts where your team is asking you really strong questions like, what is your level of involvement in this before we go any further? And I've heard people say things like, you know what? I trust those guys. Let them make the cartoon. I'm not an animator. I don't know. Show me when it's done. And I know my personality is like, yo, I'm touching all of this. You know what I mean?
We're gonna see you, and you'll be like 9,000 years old, like a mummy, like all the life force drained out of you.
But maybe this might be a unpopular answer, but it's all work. No matter what else you add to your plate, it's just more stuff on your plate that you need to clear off. So however you need to kind of rationalize that will be, that's again what Mike says, part of your personality.
Yeah, I mean, I've been through that process of signing a development deal and going all the way through it, and it was not fun. It was not something that I'm actually anxious to ever do again, because initially you're very excited, but then when you sign a development deal, you get married to somebody in development, and that person's job is to take your famous Amos cookies and make it Disney's famous Amos cookies, right? And by the time you go through that whole thing, it may not be anything like your cookie anymore, right? And if that's your baby, if that's your nexus, right? If you got one big idea, right? If that's your bone, you've got one big idea, you may not be willing to compromise, and that process may make you miserable. So on one hand, and I know that from having been through it myself and know other people that have been through it. So again, that's a whole other part of the career. If you get to that point, you might be the kind of person who goes like, my Leon is Leon. That other thing is some other thing called Leon, but I cut. I separate which You may have the personality that allows you to do that,
Right.
or you may be pulling a J. Jonah Jameson and like blowing your top every 5 minutes. And I've known a lot of people who've gone through that, that process and end up being frustrated, right? End up being very frustrated because animation is not. Jack Kirby can sit down with a pencil and make a whole universe. Mobius can make a whole universe. Jamar can make a whole universe. Animation requires hundreds of people at least to make anything. Right? And then how you carve up the who gets to say, are you a producer? Do you not get to be a showrunner? You got to have a showrunner who goes, yeah, I like your idea. You know, again, that's a whole other, if you get to that process, that's a whole other can of worms that can go great, or
there's something about like every medium that whenever it crosses into another medium, people think that's a big deal. You see actors reacting to their action figures. You see, like, you know, movie folks are like, oh, I'm so excited. It's also a comic book. Every time you move into another one, it feels like you've unlocked an achievement of some kind. I do, and I think a lot of people who like comics know that we're horribly underpaid. And so the idea that when they say we want it to be a movie, not only do they want it to be a movie, they also want you to get a paycheck. I think they feel like, you know, that's good for you as a creator. And that's, you know.
Right. It's coming from a good place. Let's not forget that.
A place of love. Absolutely. I was the same. I wanted sculptures of my characters from the Middle Age. Wanted them so bad. I knew I would be a terrible client. I knew I would. The sculptors would send me stuff, and I never did it because I just knew I would be awful. So I taught myself to sculpt. I had to do it myself. I had to carve every little thing myself. I feel like I'd have to be the same way with something with the Middle Age, unless Chris Bailey decides to do it, and then he can do it.
Get Bailey on the line, right?
Well, and then the other thing is, I guess maybe this ties into backing it all up, is there's personal satisfaction, and then there's financial satisfaction, right? And if you're financially not very satisfied, you usually are not, end up not being very personally satisfied. And I would say no one I know wanted to get into comics, at least I would say of my generation, to be rich. It was not like the foremost thing in your mind. It's like you wanted to get in comics so you could draw and create the kind of comics that you love, but you weren't saying like, I want to be a comic so I can be a millionaire, right? That was not, like, I always figured like I would make a good living, and I do, because of if I got good enough, that would come along with it, right? Now, again, that's personality. For some people, it's like, I got to make $100,000 a year, or I got to make $200,000 a year. Or I just have to make enough so that I am comfortable and I can do what I want. That's a win. Like, what is your win compared to somebody else's win in your career? You know, that is so different across the board.
I just want to put shredded pork in this ramen on my stove. That's all.
Once a week. Everything else is just carbs. Once a week.
So, all right, we have a couple questions in. Guys, if there's any questions left for us, this was a fantastic conversation. It's been flowing. I think we touched on a couple of different things. Pause. But I have a couple of other things in the chat, and I might throw one of these to Steve. But I think we might close with Patrick's. But what up, Dom Gomez? Dom, I've said this before. Dom's a fantastic young illustrator. Go check out Dom's Instagram. Dom, put your Insta in the chat. Dom says, are agents necessary nowadays? Feels impossible to get in contact with editors today. I think that's a kind of a threefold question. The first question is, and maybe this is coming from like almost like I need to do a kind of Google form on you. Like, what are you here for? Right? What are you here for? What do you want? Why do you think you need an agent? Right? I know Tim Fielder is sharking around in the chat. He'll go toe to toe with me on any conversation. But there are a lot of people that feels like an agent is totally unnecessary in your career. That is really up to what pool of water you want to swim in. Now, I've heard, and I'm not necessarily sure because I don't have those kind of ends in comics or deal with those kind of people. I'm hearing more and more that there are comic book artists who have agents who are brokering better rates for themselves in the mainstream. I don't know much about it. I hear it's happening, right? But I also know, and I just want to make sure that we're talking about the same stuff. There's also people who have managers. Now, a manager and an agent aren't exactly the same thing, especially when we're talking about visual art, right? If you were a actor and you had a manager and an agent, that would mean different things if you guys are following me. But as far as if in traditional book publishing, and we've talked about this before, it is well within reason that you could be a published successful author and be unagented, is what they call that. There's ways to get around it. There's print on demand, there's Ingram Spark, there's all those things. And this kind of comes down again to what Mike was saying about personality. What do you have the temperature for to do? If you're like, F those dudes, I'll do it myself, fantastic. Go do that. If you're like, yo, I'm hitting my head against this wall and I need to like get to the next level, I need a better infrastructure, maybe you need an agent.
I don't like answering email.
Maybe you need an assistant. You know what I'm saying? So I would say if you're, and we're talking about I guess we're talking about comic books. If you feel like you need representation to get people on the phone, that might be, you might be putting the cart before the horse. I think you may need to level up more.
I remember in the 80s there were guys who had agents. I think one of them was like David Kempe was agenting people. And I've heard other guys had agents, but in my experience, like I have an agent. My agent is for reading Hollywood contracts and saying, this is a good deal. This is a bad deal. This stuff they put in here is totally bullshit. We're taking that out, right? And I know how to read a contract by now, right? I'm pretty good at reading a contract, but he's better at reading a contract than me. So I have an agent for that. I do not have an agent for comic books because they don't pay me enough
That's
to
fair.
give a percentage of my page rate, and I haven't had it. Now I know that there were guys that had that. I would say that is extremely uncommon that people have agents, right? And so, in my experience, the agent was for looking at a entertainment contract that says, a good example was like, so you have an agent for your book deal, and your agent could say, this is what these 7 publishers do. I think this is the best one. This one's pretty good, but they got this other thing in here that we don't like. Well, we may try to get rid of it. That's what the agent does, right?
Mm-hmm.
In comics, what do I need an agent for? Right? Either they're gonna hire me and pay me enough money, or not, and then which case I'm not doing the job. An agent is not going to get you more money. The other thing people think is if you have an agent, that agent gets you work. And usually an agent does not get you work. An agent will help you if you had a contract, right? They might be able to sometimes say, well, you hear so-and-so is looking, but it's not like if you get an agent, the agent's just going to feed you work all the time. It doesn't really work like that until probably you get to a certain level. And then at that point, is it the agent that's bringing you work, or is it your career, your status is bringing you work? So I would say you don't, when you start out in comics, most people in comics don't need an agent unless you're signing some kind of entertainment deal. What you might want to have is a lawyer who can read a contract.
Yeah.
Right. I had back when they were doing Big Bad Beetleborgs, and I was self-publishing, that show took place in a comic book store. And what they wanted is they wanted you to send your comics so they could put it in the background. And then I got the contract, and the contract was like, oh, and by the way, we own all your shit forever and every blah, 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 blah. Right. And I'm like, it didn't sound right, so I write it past Jean-Marc, my agent, and he goes. And so when I talked to the guy at whoever it was, Fox or whatever, it's like, oh, no, Marvel's doing stuff. Everybody is doing, no, it's no problem. So
everybody's kung fu fighter.
Right, yeah. So that's where I'm pretty good at comics. Now I would say I'm an expert. I'm not an expert at Hollywood, although I'm pretty good at being able to read a contract now. I've read many. But that's what you want your agent for. That's where his expertise comes in, when he goes, no, this is not normal compared. This at Disney is not what they're doing at 20th Century Fox, or this is not what they're not doing at Discovery. So that's where the agent would help you. But I don't really think anybody needs an agent in comic books. And I don't know. I suppose it's true. But I never heard of anyone in comic books getting more money because you had an agent. And let's say that they gave you an extra $100 a page. Well, how much of that is going to your agent?
Right.
So
we don't have some dead air there. But I was like chatting with the chat is hot right now. And so we got all these superstars up in the chat. We could have like a Pencil to Pencil All-Stars review just in the chat. Joe Illich says, editors need problem solved. Respected agents help solve problems. But again, this doesn't usually apply to American creators. And Joe set up thread that a lot of European artists have agents for dealing with the states.
So is that because they don't speak English? And they have, they can deal with the I don't know, passports. But
it's an interesting thing, and I'm kind of defending myself in the chat. But going back to Dom's original question, I think you have to do some self-reflection on exactly why you're not getting people responding to your queries, right? And yes, you could get an agent to probably bang on some doors for you, but I want to think there's probably a little bit of it where you need to get your name out there more, or maybe you're not ready yet. And I know it's hard to hear things like that. You know what I'm saying? Or maybe I don't want to say shooting too high. I don't ever want to gatekeep. That's not what I'm doing. But I know that, maybe I needed 5 or 6 more years of just doing pages before I was ready to even talk to these people. Or I may have met people along the way, network, but I didn't send them stuff because I wasn't ready yet. You know what I'm saying? But that's just how I'm answering that question.
Or it could be all of the above, or it could be none of that. I mean, that's one of the frustrating things about the time that we live in, is that very often you will work for people that you will actually never physically see. Mm-hmm. And so you fire this, all these arrows out into the ether, and you're hoping that you get something back. And even if it's a no, the best thing about a no is if it's a no that says because.
Mm-hmm.
We're not looking for this, rather than just like nothing.
It's also about the style of work and the kind of thing you're doing, because if you're working on a comic character that very much resembles Captain America, you're most likely to get work for that kind of project. They're not going to jump to, oh, this person would be great on Ghost Rider.
Right.
There's just a sense of, the editor is going to look at it and think, what this person's doing fit with the project I have right now? I got a lot of work in sci-fi because I was doing a sci-fi comic. I got to draw Star Trek. I did a science fiction story for The Escapist, all because I was doing sci-fi. It took very little effort for an editor to imagine my work in that new container. So it's that sort of thing too. If you're trying to get work for a specific project, and depending on how specific your work is, you're kind of only giving them one opportunity to fit you into one project. If you're trying to get that seat that for Batman, there's a lot of people in queue for that, and it can be tough.
Mm-hmm.
Which is also different than when I started, right? Because many of the editors had been around for decades, and so they had the ability to look at your drawing of Batman and go, you probably draw a pretty good Superman. Mm-hmm. But they can look at what you did, your storytelling, your style. They could look at these other things and go like, okay, we'll try it out on this thing, right? That doesn't really happen now because you don't have annuals again and backups, and you don't really have that deep editorial bench that's in comics anymore that was there when I started, and you benefited from that because somebody, say like Archie Goodwin, had worked with a lot of great people. He was a great writer. He was a great editor. So if he looked at your work, he might say, well, I might try this guy out on an issue of Iron Man or whatever. Now it's really like, oh, you want to draw the Hulk? Do you have drawings of Hulk? Oh, you have drawing of Hulk. I think you can do Hulk, right? Oh, you have drawing of Spider-Man? I don't know if you can draw the Hulk, and it became more that way, and it's sort of like really that way now. And when I started, it wasn't that way, right? And so there's so many things like that are different, and you have to be able to be honest with yourself, which is really hard for some people because they feel that they're in a spot, in a place that they actually are not, right? That's another part of being in your career, managing I want my career to go this way. I want my career to take this path. Are you doing the things? Does your work really look, is it the kind of work that's going to lead you there? And usually what happens, especially when you're younger, you always find those exceptions to the rule. See, this guy, he never knew how to draw feet. I don't have to draw feet, right? It was really that way in the 90s. There was a lot of exceptions to the rules. And so a lot of younger people, they don't have the ability to be honest. And so you may not really be heading in the direction that you think that you're going to be heading, right? Which is where, as a younger artist, you benefit from a more experienced artist, editor, being able to look over your work and give you an honest critique.
Mm-hmm. We are running out of time, but we have all these really great questions. Steve, you okay to do a little bit more time on the show?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
All right, so this is really fantastic. I wish we could just do these every night live. Okay, hold on. I want to get
Brinkley Hour would just come on. The teletape going on in the background.
I'm too young to get that reference, Mike.
All right, I'm going to say Patrick to the end because it's a good way to end the show. But just to follow up on Dom's thing, and Dom's being a good sport in the chat and kind of realizing where we're going with this, and maybe just to add another cherry to this, it's not necessarily that how come these people won't respond to my emails. You kind of have to look at yourself in the mirror a little bit. It's like, am I supposed to be at this spot yet where I'm throwing out these query letters to like the editor-in-chief of DC Comics when I've maybe drawn 10 pages of my life? You know what I mean? Like I think there's a place where the rubber hits the road, and it's not to discourage you. It's just that you have a longer way to go before those people will start to look at you. And maybe you want to call that gatekeeping, but there's also quality control. I can tell you, I get emails from from kids' parents, or just I don't know what they want me to do, but they're emailing me stuff I can't respond to. It didn't mean I didn't read it. If that makes sense. So, all right, let me get to this before I get myself in trouble. Our good buddy Amani Latif just popped in and asked a good question, and now I can't find it. Okay, here it is. Amani asked, do you think that the current market and technology favors cartoonists like yourselves? I think cartoonists are making the biggest waves right now. So, I don't know, Steve, maybe do you have an answer to that? Or like maybe even, and Amani, I don't want to speak for you, but maybe in that sense of the current market and technology, like I think more about style. Like, can there be a Squirrel Girl and Lumberjanes and also Wildcats and Saga all at the same time? You know what I mean? I think that's been the biggest difference for me in the past 25 years of comics, that there's so many different things happening at the same time and they all seem to work, versus, maybe from Mike's world where you had to kind of fit into this box to be a pro. So I don't know. I'll let you guys answer that. That was just kind of my take on what Amani asked.
And I was interpreting the question to be cartoonists like yourselves, meaning people who write and draw their own stuff. That's what I meant. Like cartoonists like me.
Okay.
Not, if that's the case, if it's people who write and draw their own stuff, I think it absolutely does. Between crowdfunding and social, people say social media. I don't think about that. Oh, right. I think the ability to have your own Patreon and crowdfunding and Kickstarter and stuff like that, you get to reach audiences you never could reach before. If in the before times when it was just the direct market, syndicates and all these other things too, and the strip markets, but those were all gate kept, and you were at the mercy of the catalog and where you were placed in the catalog, and would a retailer take a chance on you, and what were you up against, and you only had that one catalog and the 2-week window to order your book to even have a chance of being seen by anybody. And once the die was cast, it was gone, because any re-offer in the catalog was seen as not even an option for indies like us.
Mm-hmm.
So online in the world right now is the best time, I think. There are so many cartoonists right now who write and draw their own stuff, or small teams of people writing and drawing their own stuff, and they're making bank. They have their small audiences. I don't know who most of them are. There are so many of them. I try to keep track of everybody, but it's
like impossible. There's so many people.
That's how great it is, and everyone's doing their own thing. Just doing their own thing, their own way. There are people making bank on Ko-Fi or coffee, whatever the name of that. I don't know how to pronounce it. All this different stuff. It's an amazing time to be a cartoonist and create your own stuff. And I think that's the best part, is that once you create it, you have it forever. And so let's say, who knows what the version is going to be in 5 years from now? It's not Patreon, it's not Ko-Fi, it's not Kickstarter, it's not Zoop. Who knows what it'll be? You'll have your own book, and you'll be able to you'll offer it in the next platform when it rolls around. It's in a way, it's sort of like, well, it was available on vinyl, then cassette, then
Kasingle,
8-track, and then you have all those different versions. We'll just keep, you have that library. You're going to be in great shape. I think about those cartoonists who didn't have that library, who were great legends at Marvel, who didn't have their own creations, and the best thing they had to offer was commissions and sketches and prints. It's like folks who have their own books that really have a shot.
I would say that I always look at that as a two world. It's the walled city, as I call it, which is a direct market, and then there's everything that's outside of the direct market, which is what I was saying the other day on my Facebook. And it just depends upon what you want to do. If you really want to draw Spider-Man, that's inside the walled city, right? But if you don't really want to do Spider-Man, you have your own weird, quirky idea, then that's outside. And like you said, now they make printing easy, they make fundraising, crowdfunding easy, they make order fulfillment easy. If you'd done this 10 years ago, it would have been really hard. When I started self-publishing in 99, it was really hard, right? I had to do a lot of legwork. And one of the reasons I named my company Action Planet is A came early in the catalog, right? Now, you could probably, again, I always sort of predicate this on like, what works for you financially? Are you doing this as a hobby and you're making comics because that's what you love to do, but you're not making enough money so that it supports you, but you make enough money that you can do it? That's one model. And then there's the model like, well, this is how I make my living, right? That's another model. And it's probably a much more strict model, right? If you're crowdfunding and you're doing all this other stuff, and at the end, you're going to have $400 a month for the next 6 months. Okay, probably can't afford to pay your rent with that, right? So I'm not saying one is good and one is bad. I just look at it as like, are you making a living? For me, it was all predicated on making my living as a cartoonist. Right. So I was living at home. I didn't have a wife who worked so everything was on me. Right. So one may work for somebody, one may not work for somebody. But yes, I think that now's the time to be creating your ideas, but of course you also have to research your ideas and do your trademark searches and all that, which is not necessarily cheap. That was another thing that I had to do in the beginning. I did all my trademark searches, and I paid the money to do that so that when I put my stuff out there, I knew I was free and clear.
Right.
Okay, we're going to say something.
But coming back to that point, I do think this is like the best time to be, writing and drawing your own stuff. More opportunity now than Wally Wood tried to create the Friends of Wood, a subscription service where you get a newsletter from him like $1 an episode. He tried crowdfunding, he did it, and today he would be doing great. And the idea that these opportunities exist now is just wonderful.
All right, let's start wrapping it up. You guys have a couple questions left. Our good buddy Eric asks, for work for hire interior, if you can, is it better nowadays to have a portfolio that shows range of skills and technique, pencils, inks, color, rather than pencils only? And we've talked about this on the live stream before, but maybe with what we've been talking about, do you guys have an answer to that, or maybe have an alternative idea of how to get your portfolio seen in 2023 in the year of Al Gore's internet?
Well, I would say, first of all, if you're trying to get work as a penciler, just show pencils. If you're trying to get a work as an inker, just show inks, right? Inking other people's stuff. Most young artists, I do not recommend that they show their own inks, because very often, in my experience, their inking hurts their pencils. They're not very good yet. But you sort of have to have a portfolio that if, like, you see a job for a penciler, but for humorous stuff, or do you have funny, funny animal stuff, or are you, Wolverine with veins in the arm? All right, that's another portfolio. put your work online. Just do a ton of work, put it up online. If your work is good, you will get eyeballs on your work. Even though Instagram sucks now, I know that every day I still see some cool thing by some person that I did not know of before. The idea, in fact, I had this discussion last year with a young guy, I believe it was from India, who was convinced that Marvel and DC were purposefully sort of like not answering his thing and giving him work or whatever. And it's like, no, that's not, that you've got to build up. You're not going to start out at Marvel and DC. You're going to start out as probably an independent comic. So if you're a young artist, find a young writer, produce stuff, put it out there. If you have to put it out for free just to get people to see it, an opportunity, if you're good, opportunity will come out of it. If you put it out there and people are like, oh, they're not really reacting to it, it actually might be that your work is not that good. I know, people don't want to hear that, but like, again, I see just on Instagram, and I have friends who share stuff, and we share stuff with each other. If you see something good, you go, hey, did you see that? I share stuff every day, not only on my Facebook, but I share stuff with my friends on Instagram, artwork by other cartoonists, all kinds of stuff every day. So if you want to be a penciler, put out pages of pencils, drawing, storytelling.
Thank you, Mike. And this one is always like, once you started talking about this, the chat room filled up. It's almost like the chat room was full of your uncles who have the best advice for you. Like everybody sounded off in the chat about this. And now George Gant and a bunch of people are talking about, you should just start doing your own webcomic.
Yeah.
Start there, you know what I mean? And I think where I was going with all of this is kind of like, and I put this in the chat, I feel like, especially with young people now, the idea that you press a button, this isn't about Dom, I love Dom, but the idea that you send something out into the world and you expect a yes is not where we came from, and I think we're old enough to understand that the lack of response means, like, their silence speaks volumes. You know what I mean? And that's not necessarily that somebody doesn't like you. It's maybe there's no space for you. There's no assignment for you. Creative has nothing for you, in old wrestling terms. Maybe this just isn't your moment, but you need to go back to the lab and keep working, not to be frustrated and give up. It's just,
again, that's the hard part when you're young,
right?
Is you're sort of blind. You're often blinded by effort, right? And I used to say, take your Xerox 8.5 by 11 art, go into the comic book store and put it on the shelf next to, John Romita Jr. or Mike Mignola, or like the best, not the worst, the best. How does your work stack up against the best? I only compare myself to the best. I don't even compare my work to my contemporaries. I compare myself to the giants. How close can I get to the giants? I still do that to this very day, and you're just going to have to be willing to put out a bunch of stuff. And I do honestly believe if you put out work that's of quality, you will get opportunity. You will have opportunity, which is what people call luck, which I call preparation meeting opportunity. If you have work that's good and you put it out there, somebody's going to see it. Somebody's going to see it. Somebody's going to want to work with you. I've seen that happen. Cheeks. Sean Galloway is a great example of that. Loish, many other people that are very well known now, that's what they did. Right now, again, the algorithm goes against you, so maybe you got to do a streaming thing. But I still believe that if you put out good work, you will have opportunity.
Yeah, word up. All right, let's start wrapping this up, guys. This was fantastic. Pause. Cheeks is spectacular. I could not agree more.
Yeah.
Sean's the
But I remember when Sean was coming along back before the internet blew up.
like in the
in the drawing room,
like
and
in
all
the drawing
that,
room,
way back in the day, right? And he was very open
on Shane's
to
board.
his work.
Mhm.
He had a great attitude. When people gave him advice, he wasn't like,
Mhm.
he was, you if you're open and you're sharing, that's what comes around goes around.
Yeah, I love it. Yeah, that's real. Persistence overcomes resistance. All right, last question, and we're getting out of here. I gotta walk the poodle. Our buddy Patrick Lugo says, "You guys, how do you define success?" Steve Conley, you go first. That's right, you're on the spot.
It's a moving target. It is. I would say that I often define success as the thing that I'm capable of doing. I start the projects off that way. I want to do a comic. I want to do a 50-page comic. That seemed doable to me. And if I could do that, it'll be a success. I try not to do things that are like, I want to make 6 figures, or I want a mansion, or I want a movie, and all these things. I think there's kind of success is this kind of can be this very nebulous thing. And I think the answer there is in the word define. I think if you are clear about what you want and you make it something attainable, then you can do it. So I mean, you could say I'm making things easier for myself by saying I'm going to do something that's like I'm just going to get 10 pages of a comic book done, and then it will be a success. I feel like that's a very reasonable thing to do, is defining something, defining achieving success as something that's achievable is key for me. And so that's what I always, with the middle age, which was kind of in a way my last stab, I mentioned this before, kind of my last stab at comics. And it was something like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to get this off my chest. I'm going to do it my way. I'm going to make myself laugh. It's going to be 50 pages and I can be out. I've got an exit strategy. And it was the thing that took off, again, because crowdfunding, Patreon, all that stuff, all those opportunities that exist nowadays. But I made it something very simple and very easy for me to achieve. And I achieved it. And then I just, okay, I did that. Now let's come up with the next thing.
I like it. Michael?
Well, I define success by how my career has turned out, right? I'm doing what I said that I wanted to do, right? I was 13. I said I wanted to work for Marvel. It took me 10 years until I was working for Marvel. And then I wanted to work for DC. So my idea of success was like my artistic heroes. I make enough money that I can support myself. I can live a comfortable living. I can buy a house. I can have a car. I can get most things that I'm interested in. That's to me what was one part of the success, is that I can make my living at it. I don't want to have to go and get another job. And then the other part is my personal goals as an artist, right? Which is separating. So I can separate my personal goals artistically from my financial goals, right? So I look at it as a dual thing, right? I mean, I'm fortunate now. My house is paid off. I'm still paying off my student loans. But I get up and walk into my studio and work 10, 12 hours a day on something that I mostly enjoy. Some days, not always. to me, that's a win. You know, I'm not having to do something every day that I don't like. I'm not having to I'm not in some dire straits, you know. So to me, that's kind of how I imagined it to be. Like when I wanted to get in, I imagined it. Oh, you know, if you worked every month or you drew a comic, then you would, all those other things would happen as a just part of the whole process. So for me, that's how I define success. It's not about like turning it into a TV show or, you know, even, you know, making millions of dollars or something. I mean, great. If that happens, that's like gravy, you know, but I want steak and potatoes every day if I can get it, you know.
What about you, Jamar?
Success to me, I love, like Marshall said, that your moving target thing was the quote of the night. Success to me is being able to kind of move forward and not have to worry about the type of things that would sideswipe you as much as you had to in the past.
Some security.
Yeah, it's a little security, and that means different things to different people, right? Like my needs being met might be different than somebody that has, you know, 2 kids, and you know, and a wife. Like that might be a different setup for you. Like you know, I don't need much, but I also like to smell the roses. We've talked about this before. I like to just, you know, sit outside and, and look at the sky for a minute. I don't want to be like this all the time. You know what I mean? And having the space and the bandwidth to do that is, y'all leave my dog alone. You know, respect the pool.
Endless bags of hot Cheetos just.
But you know, I mean, you guys have seen me on the internet running my mouth for over 6 years. You know what I mean? You guys kind of know how I am at this point. And you know, success to me is being like a cartoonist with a good reputation. And I know that when I say things, people listen. That means a lot to me. And I also don't take that for granted. And also being able to do my own work that I feel is good and not rushed. And my name is on the top of it. Like you see on my Scholastic books, the first thing on that title says JAMAR Nicholas, you know, and I think that's fantastic. And, you know, but a lot of you guys know that one of my major goals, and this is just in my whiteboard in my head, is Macy's Day Parade Leon float. And I have not forgotten about that.
I thought it would be Macy Day JAMAR Nicholas float.
that comes later. But one of my favorite quotes, because I do like a good quote, is you ready for this? Goals are dreams with deadlines. So
who said that? Charles Schultz?
I don't know. Anonymous said it. But, you know, another thing that I don't want anybody to ever take for granted is that, you know, and I start every one of these shows by saying, you're watching 3 expert cartoonists talk shop, right? And I think that's well earned. And I appreciate having this platform for us to talk about stuff. And giving back to you guys is part of it, right? I have a blinking sign in my studio that says nothing is impossible. And I believe that wholeheartedly, and I want that all for you guys too. So yes, Leon Balloon seconded. So I'm going to just start rambling, so I'm going to shut up now. But Amani says, this podcast is the epitome of success. Thank you, Amani Latif. Y'all aren't doing this to sell stuff. Y'all do this for the love of the art. I really appreciate you guys. I appreciate you too, Amani. And
you need to start selling mugs.
That's right. Oh, and thank you, Shelly. Jamar, you reach kids. That's golden. Thank you guys so much.
Planting seeds for future generations of podcasters.
Hey, I mean, you know, I think the sentiment is there, and I love this really rich community we're building. And before we get out of here, we went 30 minutes long for you guys. Pause. Please, like I said, there's superstars up in this chat. Almost everybody in this chat has their own party of constituents, please take Pencil to Pencil back to your nest and share this with everybody. Share this episode on your Facebook pages. Tell them that we're here and what we're doing is pure.
Regurgitate it to your baby birds.
Baby bird this into your fans' mouths. And don't just share the one because you were on it. Like, tell them about this every week, every Wednesday at
159. My name comes up.
That's right. Thank you. That's right. Like Wu-Tang, Pencil to Pencil is for the children. Thank you. All right, you guys. All right, let's get out of here. Thank you. Thanks, El Jamal. This was a fantastic episode. I almost feel like we don't need to interview people anymore. We should just do this every Wednesday. Thank you guys so much. And I appreciate everybody who's watching live, everybody in the chat, all the lurkers, and all of you career cartoonists out here doing the heavy lifting. I salute you. It's not easy, but we're a really, really special community. And
Brothers of the Notched Finger.
yeah, look at that. Like, I don't know if you noticed this, but this, here it is. This finger is like crooked just from holding a pencil all these years.
My little notch there in my finger.
And then the one from the mouse pad.
Yeah, so we all have our cartoonist.
Wrist, your palm callus, your notched finger,
Perfectly.
Your hunched back, your blurry eyes.
This is how I define success. This claw.
Claw. Yeah, did I show you that meme? This is from the summer. Like, there's the top of the thing is Heath Ledger Joker, and he's like, "Do you know how I got these scars?" And the next picture are like freeze pops.
Right.
That's my Gen X joke for the night. Good night, you guys. Thank you so much. We'll see you back here next Wednesday, 8 p.m. God willing. We're maybe going back into a pandemic, you guys. Never say never. But I would be remiss if I did not tell you, dear people, to wash those curvy hands. Tell them, El Jamal. Let's get out of here. Share and send this to the people you love. See you next time. Bye.